Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Governor Hogan lifts outdoor mask requirements. County relaxes COVID-19 restrictions based on vaccination rate. The race to succeed Lary Hogan as Maryland governor has two new entrants, and President Biden delivers his first address to Congress. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Former county council member and founder of SkillSmart, a technology startup working to build stronger communities, Mike Knapp. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Discussions about the coronavirus still dominates the thoughts of the nation and most Marylanders. Now, after the darkest of times, there is sustained positive news. The rate of infection for COVID-19 has dipped below 4% statewide. 1/3 of all Marylanders are fully vaccinated, and more than 50% have received at least one dose of the vaccine. Additionally, the Centers for Disease Control recently announced new guidelines regarding the wearing of face masks in public, saying that vaccinated individuals did not need to wear a mask outdoors. Well, Governor Lary Hogan did them one better and followed up on this announcement by declaring that there would be no longer would be an outdoor mask mandate except for mass gatherings like at sporting events. Mike, did the governor make the right decision?
I think he did. I think we're making progress. I think people want to see progress and want to feel that the world is reopening. And if we were living in a more normal time, I would think that everyone would still kind of take into account not so much their own personal well-being and were they vaccinated, but were they in a situation that might put someone else at risk. And because for reasons I still don't fully appreciate, this notion of having this be a political statement as to whether or not you wear a mask, I think we're in an odd place, which creates a fair amount of mixed messaging. But I think given what we have seen from CDC, what we've seen from a vaccination perspective, I think the governor's made the right call. I just would hope that people would still continue to look beyond kind of themselves and worry about those around them and try to make sure that if they're in a situation that looks like that someone could be at risk or they could be a carrier, that they're wearing a mask and just being, not that they don't have to be told, but they're actually just taking somebody else's well-being into account.
Well, we'll get into that more as we talk about the county restrictions in just a minute. And Mark, the governor also lifted restrictions on bar service and outdoor dining. Is this going in the right direction?
Well, I think it's absolutely going in the right direction. And actually, from my experience, I have gone out recently, and I'm fascinated. I'm surprised that so many restaurants even are not getting to the capacity that they could have, because so many people are frankly out of the habit of going out. And obviously that's a real problem for the comeback that we want to see for our hospitality industry. So it is the right message, and again, up to the limits and with all the appropriate precautions, it's time to get out.
Well, so one of the caveats, of course, in Governor Hogan's announcement was that local counties, including Montgomery County, could set their own restrictions and were not obligated to follow the lead from the state. And so, Mike, it always seems to me like County Executive Mark Elrich is one step behind the governor. And he immediately responded that he would probably recommend keeping the current restrictions in place. Now, I hate saying this, but there are times when Mark Elrich reminds me of the Winnie the Pooh character Eeyore, and he makes Eeyore look like an optimist. Why won't they follow the science?
Honestly, I think that following the science piece went out the window about a year ago for many people, and this became a real political discussion. And I think, interestingly, and I continue to kind of be amazed at this within the county when I get to talk to folks, is, progressive Montgomery County is very conservative when it comes to how to address this issue. And I think, interestingly, from a political perspective, that Mark as county executive is really playing to his base on this one. I think there are a lot of folks who feel that slower is better, and there are folks who generally are supportive of him. And so when he's talking in circles and listening to folks, I think that reinforces that notion to go at slow approach. I mean, that's what I see. And it's been interesting when I go other places and see where the rest of the world is, and I come back here, I think we are taking a much more conservative approach, and I think he's reflecting that.
Well, conservative is one thing, but I mean, common sense is another. I mean, honestly, I mean, you know, the whole hospitality industry and retail stores and lots of businesses have been seriously damaged and hurt by this. And so this go at slow approach that really is define what, you know, clearly is the scientific trend now, and this signals now, really is doing a disservice to the citizens of Montgomery County. He shouldn't be listening just to his base. He should be thinking about all of the people of Montgomery County. I talked to a restaurateur who has 3 restaurants, and he says, you know, I can't open my restaurant in Rockville anymore as long as we're tied not only to the percentage rules, but also the CDC 6 feet rule. I mean, there has to be a point where we recognize that people who want to go to restaurants should be allowed to go to restaurants. There's enough vaccinations out there that people who don't want to get vaccinated, who are willing to take the risk, should be able to take the risk.
I think, unfortunately, this became a political setup from the very beginning, and so now it's become: are you looking out for people's well-being, or are you looking out for the business piece? And somehow those are contrast to each other, and I don't buy that, but I think that's the lines that people have drawn, and I think that he's erred on the side of, I'm going to say I'm defending people's health as opposed to the economics. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, but I think that's how people are, I think that's how some of those lines have been drawn, and I think that's the side he's chosen to be on.
I think people, it's political in a sort of small p, if that makes any sense, way. There are very different perceptions across it. There's a continuum, if you will, between safety and security. And Mike, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, in Montgomery County, there's this sort of more security focus.
Oh, come on, Mark, it's a joke. Montgomery County
it is reflecting.
It's a regional joke.
It is reflecting, but I agree with Mike in terms of it's reflecting that sense of the base that we want to be more secure. Elsewhere in the country, people are far more comfortable to, you know, embracing, accepting a risk. We take risks in lots of different contexts, and that is what it is.
Well, Mark, the county, you know, with much fanfare last Friday announced that it would relax restrictions based on the percentage of vaccinations delivered to county residents. But is that really the right metric to employ, given that the infection rate is below 4% and the percentage of county hospitals with COVID patients is 6.7%? Is that the right metric?
No, I personally, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, you know, I've been vaccinated, as is roughly half the folks, at least half the adults have been vaccinated. I continue to wear a mask when the circumstances call for. But I mentioned, I mean, we're talking about going out to dinner on the weekend and really finding we weren't even close to 25% open. Certainly more seats were available. People in Montgomery County are continuing to vote with their feet as well.
Well, this is the other thing. There's a large segment of the population, even here in Montgomery County, that won't get vaccinated, or they either don't want to get vaccinated, or they are fearful of being vaccinated. What happens if that number is 59%, and we never get to the magic 60% number? Are we going to stay closed for another 5 years, waiting for 1% more to get vaccinated? I mean, Don't
worry about that, Casey, because we all know that these rules, these standards, these criteria get changed.
Okay, I'm going to steal a line from a more famous Aiken, Senator George Aiken, who declared, when talking about the Vietnam War, why don't we just declare victory and leave? Right? That's what I think we should do. We should declare victory and open up. But I want to go on and talk about the schools now. Mike, the state seems to have gotten new vigor with success of the vaccination program, and the Board of Education declares that full in-person learning in September is the goal. Now, I'm going to kind of crib from a question I was going to ask Mark. There are new reports saying that that Maryland students are failing as a result of the type of learning we're doing. So what are the arguments for staying closed or having these partial hybrid systems?
I think it's what Mark was talking about earlier. I think you're still seeing a segment of the population, and unfortunately, you're seeing this in again another stark contrast of the lines that are being drawn. You're seeing. I was reading this morning that San Francisco is still 100% virtual because the teachers won't show up. And so I think there's a segment of the population in certain places that are taking a much more secure approach, whether it's a secure perspective, a political perspective. And I think part of the county's response is going to be, can they get the workforce to participate in an in-person environment, and how will that play out? And can they, what will that dance look like between management, administration, public policy, and the people who represent them?
Well, Mark, what's so shocking here is that the students that are hurt the most by this system are the ones that have the most at risk. They are the marginalized students who can't go to a special tutor pod to be trained, who don't have the at-home environment that is necessary for them to learn. Why won't we think about the care and the need of the student instead of the teachers?
Well, I think as we open up, we're going to learn far more about the sort of unintended or unexpected consequences. And clearly the educational gap that will widen, it would appear, as a result of this is going to be one of those. I wish one of the things that was on the table was moving the school year into the summer. I recognize there are issues, air conditioning, all that kind of stuff. But clearly in this situation, it would have been appropriate to consider that, to give kids the chance to be able to stay current with what their educational goals are.
I think that's a terrific idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think we should be considering things like that. We've got to recognize that this has been an unusual time, and we've got to take unusual measures to be able to address that for our students, because I think, as my wife has said, this whole population is going to have an 18, 24-month window, and they're going to go through with life with this asterisk. So you guys you grew up at that period. That's what the challenge is.
But Mike, won't this make have a greater impact on Montgomery College, who will find students who aren't prepared to go to college but who have been graduated?
Sure. I mean, we're already looking at that. And how do you then provide the supports to address that? I mean, we've been trying to bridge that gap between MCPS and the college for the last 10 years. And so that only makes it even harder to do. So it's going to cost us more money and more resources and better strategies.
And I want you get the last word. When we come back from the short break, how did President Biden's first speech to Congress fare? And two interesting names enter the discussion for the governor's race. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Even though Governor Lary Hogan has almost 2 more years in office, the list of those who would succeed him continues to grow. This week, former U.S. Secretary of Education John B. King Jr. formally announced that he is seeking the Democratic gubernatorial nomination, and former Lieutenant Governor Michael Steele suggested that he was considering running as a Republican for the Republican nomination. Mike, I have to confess that I never heard of Secretary King before his announcement. That isn't surprising if he was a Baltimore guy. How serious is his candidacy?
I don't think he's necessarily laid the foundation that he needs to have. And especially when you look at the fact that somebody like Rashern Baker has also announced that he's back in the race too. I'm not sure how former Secretary King presents himself in a way that resonates broadly. That being said, we're a year out from a primary, and a lot of folks are going to be throwing their hat in the ring. But no, I think that the Democratic Party needs to identify a strong candidate and to start to begin to coalesce around them, because I think the Republican Party is going to have a couple really strong and good and attractive candidates.
And so that is a perfect segue to Mark. And so, Mark, after bashing the Trump administration as a spokesperson for MSNBC, does former Lieutenant Governor and former head of the Republican National Committee, Michael Steele, believes he will be attractive to Republican primary voters.
He would have challenge in winning a primary. I think he'd have to do a pretty convincing job of explaining which of the policies of the Trump administration he supported, because those policies are very popular among Republican voters. He's lost a primary before. It ran for the first time ran for controller. He lost a primary. I think he'd have an uphill battle, and I think generally speaking, the Republican Party will be coalescing around Kelly Schultz for governor.
Well, I just know that from the exposure that I've had, that there's a metamorphosis going on in the Republican Party, and it's becoming much more dominated by more conservative people on the right than a moderate like Michael. I mean, I've known Michael a long time, and I don't think he's going to have a very warm reception in the party. Now, moving on. Today, as we tape this program, it marks the 100th day in office for President Joseph Robinette Biden. Last evening, President Biden delivered his first address to Congress, laying out his agenda for America. So, Mike, many people have been surprised by the progressive nature that President Biden has exhibited during his first days in office. Even progressive Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted that progressives should be satisfied with the Biden agenda. So how is President Biden doing?
I think he's doing well. I think he's walked into a very challenging situation. I think he's actually been clear in the measures he's been trying to take. I think he's focusing on how do we re-engage the middle class? How do we provide resources to be able to restart the economy? I think he's doing a good job. And I don't think people should be surprised that he's a little more progressive than people had anticipated, because I think he signaled that through the campaign. And I think it draws a stark contrast to where we've been over the last 4 years. The other piece I would put out there is it's interesting, and I think the initiatives he's proposing are very costly initiatives. And yet, when we look at the amount of money that was spent over the last 4 years, and arguably to uphold the top 1% or 4% of wage earners in the country, at least these dollars are looking at a broader cross section of America to be recipients.
Mike, you just really glossed over a huge mountain of debt that we're talking about.
Well, yeah, but that huge mountain of debt that we're talking about was unfortunately, from a cyclical perspective, put in place by the previous administration.
But the proposals that President Biden has been offering, certainly the two plans that have been initiated, and now the families plan that was proposed yesterday, certainly those are all new dollars that have to come from somewhere. And the question is where?
We could not. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, and these would be ongoing programs. So certainly the family program, as opposed to sort of one shot or a single initiative like the stimulus program.
But if we look at the tax program that was put in place from the previous administration at the very beginning, and we look at the challenge that is facing and the people that's benefiting, that will have a much greater impact over time than the initiatives that are being put forward by the Biden administration. And by rolling back a portion of that, you basically cover most of the costs that you're putting forward in these new initiatives.
Well, a 40% capital gains tax is far more than "quote unquote" rolling back the Trump increase.
I don't disagree. I would go back for just going back to where we had been previously. So I'm not saying
that's not the proposal.
The elimination of like-kind exchanges in real estate, in commercial real estate transactions, that's been in place since 1922. That's more than a rolling back. The change in the on the estate taxes, on what you're able to deduct when you die, that's gonna hit middle Americans, small business owners the most. Not just farmers, but small business guys who own their business 100%. Then all of a sudden, their kids are going to get taxed because those businesses don't have a basis.
Yeah,
right.
In particular, those tax changes are absolutely devastating to small business and job creation. So we talk. The idea is $400,000, but the capital gain of a businessman who is selling a business or a business that ends up into an estate that ends up bumping above $400,000. That's the reflection of a lifetime of work.
And I don't disagree. And I think you're at a point where you're looking at, as a former legislator, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you put a proposal on the table. If you put something out there that's not paid for, people say, oh my goodness, here's something that's not paid for. If you put something out there as a straw man to say, here's a way to pay for something, oh my goodness, I can't believe you would do that. The reality is that anything that's going to pass is going to be managed, is going to be compromised, is going to be put back into some middle ground. And I think the fact that he's put something out there that at least says, here's a way to do it. I don't agree with all the things they put out there, but at least puts a marker on one side that allows a conversation to happen to say, I think that's too much, or I think that goes too far. Let's pull something back to the center, which I think is where ultimately you'll get to. But at least there's a plan that says, here's a way to do it, which engages the conversation as opposed to the rhetorical standoff.
So, Mark, one of the things that candidate Biden talked about a great deal was about unity, bringing the country together. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell pronounced the first 100 days of the Biden administration as a huge disappointment and accused the president of breaking his campaign promise to bring the country together. So how is the president doing on unifying the country?
Well, the challenge that he faces is that we are very much in a 50-50 or 49-49 country. 50 literally in the Senate, 50% in each, 50 in each party. And in the House, Republicans reflect 49%. It's a very, very narrow margin. Majority of the governors are Republican, and majority of state legislatures are Republican. As you described at the front, he has led off with proposals that make the AOC and the squad very happy, that are really much more of the progressive, of the justice wing of the Democratic Party. And it has not shown that balance that moves to the center. Maybe this is a negotiating play, but taking the president at his word, he has certainly started from a far more left-wing perspective than those people were hoping that he would move to the middle would have expected.
Well, I don't know any Republican who thinks that there has been a reaching out to the other side to bring the other side, the conservative movement, into the fold. In fact, just the opposite. I think the Republicans feel under attack at all levels of government, and is there an initiative that you can think of that you would identify that a Republican would come across the aisle and say, I'd be happy to work with you on this? Because that's the challenge I've seen is Tim Scott offered a bill last year on police reform, which was ignored.
And so, infrastructure.
There are lots of things that the Republicans will work on.
Clearly, on infrastructure, there's potential common ground for a more focused, just on traditional infrastructure, that it has the potential of compromise.
And I think the reality is that this will get you to a place where we now have sides that can begin to negotiate to get to a place that gets the compromise, which is what we used to have, which is how you get there.
We're going to have to wrap it up because Carolyn's flashing the pink card at us. So, obviously this discussion is only in its infancy. After 100 days, we'll have to see how it plays out. Stay tuned for parting shots. And thank you. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, I want to acknowledge that Mike Knapp is here because you're having a very, very busy day as chairman of the board of trustees of Montgomery College, and that the college is an extraordinary resource for the county, and you now have the challenge of picking a new president, and we certainly hope that you can kind of continue with what we've been able to get from the college in the past. It obviously is an important resource for our county.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Yes, Dr. Pollard announced this morning that she'll be taking a position at Nevada State College, which is a four-year institution in Nevada with a very similar mission to what Montgomery College has, but a newer institution and focusing on a four-year program as opposed to just a two-year. And so it was an opportunity she felt that she couldn't pass up. And I just want to shout out to her and to the broader staff that she has pulled together an amazing team. She's been an amazing leader. She's been here for almost 11 years, which is nearly 3 times the tenure of average community college president. They're usually in place about 3.5 years. And so we've been blessed to have her leadership. She's done a fabulous job at expanding activities and roles of the college and the role it plays within the community. And now the challenge to us as a community as a whole is, how do we recognize the changing nature of higher education? How do we recognize the role that it can play in helping Montgomery County transition out of the pandemic and really grow our economic base? And that's what we're going to be looking for as a leader to help us take it to that next level. He or she has huge shoes to fill, but a great role model to emulate themselves after. And we look forward to working with the community to make great strides in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, Mike. And I want to thank both Mike and Mark for being here today. And next week, we're going to take up a topic that just appeared in today's Bethesda Beat, which is a story about how 100 of the unaccompanied minors that have crossed the border this past 4 months have been transported to Montgomery County, and we can expect many more. So that'll be on next week's show. I want to thank the audience for tuning in this week and tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.